The grand ballroom of Harwick Manor blazed with candlelight, hundreds of flames dancing in crystal chandeliers that cast fractured rainbows across silk gowns and polished metals. Lady Sonara Cresswell had found sanctuary behind a marble column near the service corridor, close enough to observe the glittering assembly, yet far enough to remain invisible. At 23, Sonara had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. Her gown, a pale lavender silk that had belonged to her late mother, was elegant but dated. Her dark chestnut hair was arranged simply, without the elaborate jewels and feathers adorning the other ladies. She was a ghost, haunting her own guardian's celebration, present in body but absent from every guest list that mattered. She pressed her back against the cool marble and allowed herself to breathe. One more hour. Survive one more hour of pitying glances and whispered speculation, and she could retreat to her chambers. Tomorrow she would find another excuse to avoid Lord Harwick's increasingly pointed suggestions about her future. That future, she reminded herself grimly, was the entire purpose of tonight's gathering. A cluster of matrons had gathered mere feet from her column, their voices carrying with the careless volume of women who assumed servants were deaf and wallflowers were furniture. "Pitiable creature," one of them declared. Lady Ashbury, if Sonara recognized the nasal tone correctly. 23, and still unwed. Her parents left her nothing but debts, you know. Lord Harwick has been exceedingly generous, keeping her all these years. Generous? Another voice, dripping with false sympathy. Is that what we're calling it? I heard he's finally found a solution to his little problem. Sonara's blood turned to ice. Sir Godric Vane, Lady Ashbury confirmed with relish. The contracts are being signed tonight. Harwick's been negotiating for months. Godric Vane? But he's nearly 60, and his first 2 wives, both dead within 5 years of marriage. Tragic accidents, supposedly. A meaningful pause. But Vane is wealthy, and Harwick owes him considerable gambling debts. The girl is payment, essentially. Rather clever when you think about it. Does she know? I doubt it. Harwick plans to announce it at midnight. A surprise betrothal. How romantic. Cruel laughter rippled through the group. Sonara couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Sir Godric Vane. She had met him twice, both times feeling his watery eyes crawl over her body like slugs across bare skin. His hands, liver-spotted and greedy, had lingered too long when he kissed her knuckles. And his wives? Everyone knew about his wives. The poor thing has no choice, of course, Lady Ashbury continued. Harwick is her legal guardian until she marries. She's completely at his mercy. Speaking of mercy, did you see who else arrived tonight? The Duke of Thornwood, of all people. I nearly fainted when his carriage pulled up. The atmosphere shifted. Even through her horror, Sonara registered the change in their voices. Fear now, mixed with dark fascination. Theron Blackwood? Here? I thought he never attended society functions. He doesn't. Harwick must have something he wants. Business dealings, I imagine. Nothing else would drag that monster into civilized company. Monster is rather harsh. Is it? He killed a man, Prudence. Shot him dead in a duel over God knows what. The body wasn't even cold before he fled to the continent for 3 years. Only returned to society 6 months ago, and nobody will receive him. The man is dangerous. Dangerous, the other woman repeated with a shiver that sounded almost pleasurable. And devastatingly handsome, I'm told. What a waste. Their conversation drifted toward other gossip, but Sonara had stopped listening. Midnight. The announcement was at midnight. She glanced at the ornate clock above the fireplace. 40 minutes. She had 40 minutes before her entire life was signed away to a man who had buried 2 wives under suspicious circumstances. Her guardian had planned this deliberately. The public announcement, the gathered witnesses, the celebration already underway. By the time she learned of her fate, refusal would mean humiliating Lord Harwick before all of society. And she knew exactly how he punished humiliation. The bruise on her ribs from last week's discussion about her future still ached when she breathed too deeply. Sanara's hands trembled against the marble column. 40 minutes. She had 40 minutes to make a choice that would determine whether she lived or died. She would not marry Godric Vane, which meant she had to run. The servants' corridor was narrow and poorly lit, but Sanara knew every turn by heart. 5 years of avoiding Lord Harwick's attention had taught her every hidden passage in this manner, every shadow where a desperate woman could disappear. She moved quickly, abandoning the delicate slippers that clicked too loudly on stone floors. The cold seeped through her stockings, but cold was better than capture. Her mother's gown snagged on a rough edge of brick. She heard the fabric tear and kept moving. The kitchen was chaos, servants rushing to prepare the midnight champagne toast that would celebrate her enslavement. Sanara pressed herself into an alcove as a footman hurried past, then slipped through the back door into the night. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the ground slick with mud. The darkness was nearly absolute, clouds obscuring whatever moonlight might have guided her path. She knew the stables were to the east, but stealing a horse was too obvious. Harwick would have men on the roads within minutes. The carriages. The guests' carriages were lined along the western drive. Their drivers gathered around a fire pit near the gatehouse, drinking and gambling while they waited. If she could hide in one of them, perhaps the departing guest would take her far enough to what? She had no money, no friends, no family willing to defy Lord Harwick. She was running toward nothing, but nothing was still better than Godric Vane's bedchamber. Sanara crept along the tree line, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The carriage line materialized from the darkness, perhaps a dozen vehicles of varying grandeur. She needed one that would depart late after the announcement, when Harwick would be too busy accepting congratulations to notice her absence immediately. She moved between the carriages, searching for one that was unlocked. The first 3 were secured. The 4th had a driver sleeping inside. The fifth was magnificent. Black lacquer gleaming even in the darkness, drawn by 4 horses of pure midnight. The family crest on the door was unfamiliar, but she registered thorns encircling what might have been a wolf's head. The door was slightly ajar. Sanara didn't hesitate. She pulled the door open, hoisted herself inside, and pressed into the far corner of the bench, pulling a traveling blanket over her body. The interior smelled of leather and sandalwood, and something else. Something masculine and unexpectedly comforting. She forced herself to breathe slowly, listening for sounds of pursuit. Minutes passed. 5. 10. The distant noise of the ballroom continued, punctuated by occasional laughter. No alarm had been raised. Perhaps no one had noticed her absence yet. Perhaps. The carriage door opened. Sanara stopped breathing entirely. A figure climbed inside, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with lethal grace despite the confined space. He settled onto the opposite bench, so close she could have touched his knee. The door closed behind him, plunging them into complete darkness. "Drive on," he called to someone outside. "I've had enough of this circus." The carriage lurched into motion. Sanara remained frozen beneath the blanket, her heart hammering so violently she was certain he must hear it. The wheels crunched over gravel, then found the smoother surface of the main road. They were leaving. She was escaping. "You can come out now." His voice was deep and calm, almost conversational. Sanara's blood turned to ice for the second time that evening. "The blanket is an admirable effort," he continued, "but you've been trembling since I entered. The fabric moves rather distinctly." She couldn't respond, couldn't think. Everything she had risked, and she'd been discovered within minutes. "I have a pistol," he added, almost gently, "in case you are considering anything dramatic, though I suspect you're more frightened than dangerous." Slowly, Sanara pulled the blanket down from her face. She couldn't see him clearly in the darkness, only the suggestion of sharp features and eyes that caught what little light filtered through the carriage windows. But she could feel him watching her, assessing her with an intensity that should have been terrifying. "Please," she whispered, "please, don't send me back." Silence stretched between them, heavy with her desperation and his unreadable contemplation. Then he leaned forward, and a sliver of moonlight illuminated his face. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, dark hair falling across a forehead creased with what might have been concern. His eyes were pale, gray, or perhaps green, and they held none of the cruelty she had expected. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "I don't return frightened women to men who hurt them." Sanara felt tears spill down her cheeks, hot against her rain-chilled skin. "You don't understand. He'll come looking. Harwick has influence, money, connections. Whoever you are, he'll—" "I know exactly who Lord Harwick is," the man interrupted. "I also know he's a coward who preys on those who can't defend themselves." He settled back against the seat, and his next words carried a weight that made her breath catch. "My name is Theron Blackwood. I'm the Duke of Thornwood, and I assure you, Lord Harwick has no influence over me." The Duke of Thornwood, the monster, the murderer, the man even society's most powerful feared. She had climbed into his carriage. Sanara should have been terrified, but looking at him now, at the quiet steadiness in his eyes, she felt something far more dangerous than fear. She felt hope. The carriage continued through the night, wheels drumming against the road, in a rhythm that should have been soothing. Sanara sat rigid in her corner, acutely aware of every breath the Duke took, every shift of his weight against the leather seat. He hadn't spoken since revealing his identity, seemingly content to let her process the enormity of her situation. She had fled one monster only to place herself at the mercy of another. Except, he didn't feel like a monster. "You're trying to decide if the rumors are true," he said finally, his voice cutting through the darkness. "Whether I murdered a man in cold blood. Whether you've escaped one danger by stumbling into something worse." Sanara swallowed hard. "Have I? That depends on your definition of worse." He shifted, and she caught the glint of moonlight on his signet ring. "I did kill a man. I won't lie to you about that. But the circumstances were rather more complicated than society's gossip suggests." "What circumstances?" "That's a story for another time." His voice carried a note of finality that discouraged further questions. "Suffice to say, he deserved what he received, and I would do it again without hesitation." The bluntness of it stunned her. No elaborate justifications, no attempts to paint himself as blameless. Just facts, delivered without apology. "And you fled to the continent?" "I removed myself from society to spare my family the scandal. My mother was still alive then. She found the whispers distressing." Something flickered in his voice, there and gone. "She passed last year. I had returned to England long before that, but I kept to myself, avoided society entirely. When she died, I went to Italy to settle her affairs. When I came back 6 months ago, I decided to finally rejoin the world. I saw no further reason to hide." Sanara absorbed this information, trying to reconcile the murderer of society's imagination with the man sitting across from her. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "about your mother." He inclined his head, accepting the condolence without comment. Then his focus sharpened on her once more. "Now, tell me about your situation. Everything. If I'm to help you, I need to understand what we're dealing with." "We." The word lodged in her chest like an ember. My parents died when I was 18, Sinara began, her voice steadier than she expected. A carriage accident. They left nothing but debts. Lord Harwick was my father's cousin, and he agreed to become my guardian. I thought he was being kind. But he wasn't. He wanted my mother's property, a small estate in Wiltshire, barely profitable. But it bordered land he was trying to consolidate, and with me as his ward, he could control it until I married. She twisted her hands in her lap. I've spent 5 years trying to avoid that marriage, refusing suitors he selected, finding excuses, making myself as undesirable as possible. And tonight? Sir Godric Vane. The name tasted like poison. He's 60 years old. He's buried 2 wives under circumstances no one believes were accidental, and Harwick owes him a fortune in gambling debts. The marriage was to be announced at midnight. I would have had no opportunity to refuse. The Duke was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was cold, but the coldness wasn't directed at her. Harwick planned to trade you for his gambling debts. Yes. And Vane's previous wives? The first fell down a staircase 6 months after the wedding. The second drowned in a bathing pond, alone, supposedly, despite not knowing how to swim. Sinara's hands had begun to tremble again. Everyone knows. No one does anything, because Vane is wealthy and powerful, and the women he marries are always without protectors. Like you. Like me. The Duke leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze never leaving her face. You have no family who would take you in. No friends who could offer protection. My mother had a sister in Scotland, but she died years ago. I have no one. The admission scraped her throat raw. Harwick made certain of that. He isolated me deliberately. Any connection I tried to maintain, any friend who showed too much interest, he found ways to sever the relationship. Systematic, the Duke observed. He was grooming you for exactly this situation. Sinara hadn't thought of it in those terms, but hearing him say it aloud, she recognized the truth. 5 years of careful manipulation, stripping away every option until she had nowhere to run. Except, she had run. And now she was here, in a stranger's carriage, hurtling through the darkness toward an uncertain future. What happens now? She asked. When morning comes, Harwick will be searching for me. He has resources, influence. Even if you're the Duke of Thornwood, even if society fears you. Society's fear of me is precisely why Harwick cannot touch you under my protection. The Duke's voice carried absolute certainty. He's a bully who targets the vulnerable. He would never dare challenge me directly. Your protection. Sinara tested the words. And what would that protection cost me? His eyes met hers, and she saw something flicker in their depths. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. You're wise to ask. Nothing in this world comes without price. He straightened, his expression turning calculating in a way that made her stomach tighten. I have a proposition for you, Lady Sinara, one that would benefit us both. What kind of proposition? The kind that will make Lord Harwick's claims on you legally void. The kind that will give you freedom and security for the rest of your life. He paused, letting the words land. The kind that will require you to become my wife. The carriage suddenly felt very small. Your wife, Sinara repeated numbly. In name, initially. A marriage of convenience, designed to remove you from Harwick's control permanently. Once married, you are no longer his ward. Your property reverts to your control, managed by your husband. That husband being me. And what do you gain from this arrangement? Something I've been trying to achieve for 6 months. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Respectability, or at least the appearance of it. My reputation makes certain transactions difficult. Business dealings, parliamentary influence, access to circles that remain closed to me despite my title. A wife, particularly one who presents well and isn't terrified of me, would soften my image considerably. You want me to make you look human. The corner of his mouth twitched. Bluntly put, but accurate. Sonara's mind raced. Marriage to a stranger, a man she'd met less than an hour ago, a man society called a murderer. It was insane. It was reckless. It was also her only option. If I refuse, then I'll take you as far as the next town and give you enough money to establish yourself somewhere Harwick won't think to look. You'll have perhaps 3 months before he finds you, given his resources. After that, he shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its implication. 3 months of freedom, then capture, then Godric Vane, or marriage to the most feared duke in England. I need to think, she whispered. Of course. He knocked twice on the carriage roof, and the vehicle slowed. We'll stop at an inn for what remains of the night. You'll have your own room, your own lock on the door. I'll require your answer by morning. The carriage halted. The Duke opened the door and stepped out, then turned to offer her his hand. Sonara stared at that hand, steady and waiting. She thought of Godric Vane's liver-spotted fingers, greedy and grasping. She thought of Lord Harwick's fist, connecting with her ribs. She thought of every choice that had been stolen from her for 5 years. And she thought of a man who spoke to her with blunt honesty rather than pretty lies, who looked at her as if her answer actually mattered. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her from the carriage. His grip was warm, strong, careful. I don't need until morning, she heard herself say. My answer is yes. The Duke studied her face for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Then we have an agreement, Lady Sonara. His hand tightened briefly around hers before releasing. For better or worse, it seems we're to be married. She should have felt trapped. She should have felt desperate. Instead, standing in the courtyard of a strange inn, with mud on her stockings and her mother's torn gown hanging loose around her shoulders, Sonara felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. She felt like she had chosen. Whatever came next, this was her decision, her gamble, her future. And looking at Theron Blackwood, the monster who had whispered, "You're safe now," to a terrified stranger in his carriage, she found herself wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, she had chosen well. Morning light revealed what darkness had concealed. Sonara woke in an unfamiliar bed, disoriented for several heartbeats, before memory crashed over her like cold water. The ballroom, the overheard conversation, the desperate flight through rain-soaked grounds, the carriage, the Duke, her husband-to-be. She sat up slowly, taking stock of her surroundings. The room was modest but clean, a country inn catering to travelers of moderate means. Her ruined gown hung over a chair near the window, and someone had laid out a simple gray traveling dress on the foot of the bed. It wasn't fashionable, but it was clean and intact, which made it considerably better than what she'd arrived in. A knock at the door made her tense. "Lady Sonara," a woman's voice, unfamiliar. "His Grace requests your presence for breakfast when you're ready. I'm to help you dress." 20 minutes later, Sonara descended the narrow stairs to find the Duke seated alone in a private dining room. In daylight, he was even more striking than she'd realized. Tall and lean, with the kind of angular features that artists would itch to capture. His dark hair was swept back from his forehead, and his pale gray eyes tracked her approach with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and oddly protected. He rose as she entered, a gesture of courtesy she hadn't expected. "You slept well?" "Better than I had any right to, given the circumstances." She took the seat across from him, acutely aware of how plain she must look in the borrowed dress. "Thank you for the clothes. The innkeeper's wife was kind enough to provide them. I've compensated her generously." He poured her tea without asking her preference, adding a splash of milk. We have matters to discuss before we continue our journey. Our journey to where, exactly? Dunmarron Hall, my estate in Northumberland, remote enough that Harwick will have difficulty reaching you, fortified enough that he'll regret trying if he does. The Duke's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing arrangements for a house party rather than a siege. We'll be married there by special license within 3 days. 3 days. Senara's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. You seem to have everything planned. I've had 6 months to consider what I'd need if I ever found a suitable arrangement. You've simply accelerated the timeline. His gaze met hers directly. I should warn you what you're walking into. More warnings? You've already told me you killed a man. I killed a man who deserved killing. That's not what I'm warning you about. He set down his own cup with precise care. Society has constructed a version of me that serves their purposes. The brooding monster, the dangerous Duke, the cautionary tale mothers whisper to frightened daughters away from unsuitable attachments. Most of it is exaggeration. Most of it? I have a temper. I don't suffer fools. I've cultivated a reputation for ruthlessness because it keeps people at a distance, and I've preferred that distance. His jaw tightened. But I'm not cruel. Lady Senara, I won't strike you. I won't force myself on you. I won't humiliate you publicly or privately. Whatever else you fear from this arrangement, fear not that. The directness of it stole her breath. She thought of Lord Harwick, who had smiled so kindly at her parents' funeral before slowly revealing the predator beneath the mask. How do I know you're telling the truth? You don't. He acknowledged the point without defensiveness. Trust is earned, not promised. I'm simply stating my intentions, so you have something to measure my actions against. If I prove false, you'll know it quickly. Senara studied him across the table, this strange man who spoke of trust and temper with equal frankness. He wasn't trying to charm her, wasn't trying to make her comfortable. He was simply laying out facts and allowing her to draw her own conclusions. It was, perversely, the most reassuring thing anyone had done for her in years. What do you expect from me? She asked. In this arrangement? Publicly. That you stand beside me at social functions and appear to tolerate my company. That you help me rehabilitate my reputation enough to accomplish certain goals. He paused. Privately? Nothing you don't freely offer. We'll have separate chambers. You'll have your own income, your own schedule, your own life. I'm not purchasing a companion, Lady Senara. I'm acquiring a partner in a mutually beneficial deception. And if one of us wants to end the arrangement? After 1 year, either party may request an annulment or separation, with appropriate financial settlement. His expression flickered with something that might have been dark humor. Though I should mention that annulment would require proving non-consummation, which means I understand what it means. Senara felt heat rise to her cheeks. A year of marriage in name only. Unless circumstances change. His gaze held hers, and something electric passed between them. But that decision would be yours to make, not mine to demand. The conversation was so far removed from anything she'd imagined for her wedding arrangements that Senara almost laughed. No talk of love, of duty, of wifely obligations. Just terms and conditions, negotiated like a business contract. And yet, beneath the practicality, she sensed something else. Something he wasn't saying. Why me? She asked suddenly. There must be other women in difficult circumstances who would accept such an arrangement. Women better positioned to help your reputation. Why rescue a stranger with nothing to offer? The Duke considered this carefully. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its careful neutrality. Because when you climbed into my carriage, covered in mud and shaking with fear, your first thought was to bargain, not to beg. not to weep. You asked what it would cost you." His mouth curved slightly. "That told me more about your character than 100 introductions at society functions. It told you I'm desperate. It told me you're practical. Desperate people plead. Practical people negotiate." He stood, dropping coins on the table for their meal. "The carriage is ready. We have a long journey ahead, and I'd prefer to reach Dunmarren before Harwick can organize pursuit." Senara rose to follow him, her mind still churning with everything that had been said, and everything that hadn't. At the door, she paused. "Your Grace?" He turned. "Theron," he corrected. "If we're to be married, you should probably use my name." "Theron." It felt strange on her tongue, intimate. "Thank you. For last night. For this. For not being what everyone says you are." Something shifted in his expression, too quickly for her to interpret. "Don't thank me yet, Lady Senara. You haven't seen Dunmarren. You haven't met my household." He held the door open for her, his voice dropping to something almost soft. "You haven't discovered what I'm actually hiding." Before she could ask what he meant, he was striding toward the carriage, leaving her to follow with 1,000 new questions burning in her chest. The journey to Northumberland took 2 days. They traveled in a kind of wary companionship, speaking when necessary, lapsing into silence when words felt inadequate. Senara learned that Theron read voraciously during travel, producing books from hidden compartments in the carriage with the air of a man revealing treasured secrets. She learned that he took his tea without sugar and his meals without complaint, even when roadside inns offered barely edible fare. She learned that he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable but intent. On the second evening, as the carriage crested a hill and began its descent into a valley shrouded in mist, Theron finally spoke about their destination. "Dunmarren has been in my family for 300 years. It's not beautiful in the conventional sense. Some find it oppressive." Senara peered through the window at the landscape emerging from the fog. Wild moorland stretched in every direction, purple with heather, despite the lateness of the season. And rising from the valley floor, like something from a Gothic novel. "Good Lord," she breathed. Dunmarren Hall was massive, stone walls the color of thunderclouds, towers that clawed at the sky, windows that caught the dying light and reflected it back like suspicious eyes. The building seemed to grow from the earth itself, as if it had always been there, watching and waiting. "I told you," Theron said quietly. "Not beautiful." "No," Senara agreed. "Not beautiful, but magnificent." He looked at her sharply, as if checking for sarcasm. Finding none, something in his posture relaxed almost imperceptibly. "My mother hated it. Said it felt like living inside a clenched fist." His voice carried old grief, carefully contained. "She spent as little time here as possible. After she died, I stopped trying to make it pleasant for visitors." "How long since you've had visitors?" "Willing ones? Years." The carriage passed through massive iron gates and wound up a drive lined with ancient oaks. As they approached the main entrance, servants emerged to meet them, their faces carefully blank in the way of staff trained to show no reaction to their master's eccentricities. An elderly man with military bearing stepped forward as Theron descended from the carriage. "Welcome home, Your Grace. We received your message and have prepared accordingly." "Thank you, Merrick." Theron turned to hand Senara down from the carriage. "This is Lady Senara Cresswell. She'll be staying with us, permanently." If Merrick found this announcement surprising, his expression betrayed nothing. "Of course, Your Grace. Welcome, my lady. Mrs. Caddock has prepared the Rose Suite." The Rose Suite. Senara remembered Lady Ashbury's gossip about society's most feared duke, and wondered what kind of roses grew in a place like this. Inside, Dunmarren was exactly as imposing as its exterior suggested. High ceilings lost in shadow, portraits of stern ancestors lining paneled walls, furniture that looked built to last centuries rather than to provide comfort. And yet, as Merrick led them through corridor after corridor, Sonara noticed details that softened the severity. Fresh flowers on hall tables, books left open on window seats, as if someone had been reading and would return momentarily. A cat, orange and enormously fat, sleeping in a patch of lamplight. "You have a cat," she said, surprised. "Several, actually. They appeared over the years. I never had the heart to turn them out." Theron caught her expression and raised an eyebrow. "What?" "The most feared duke in England keeps cats." "The most feared duke in England keeps whatever he likes. That's rather the point of being feared." But his mouth twitched with something like humor. The Rose Suite was located in the East Wing, far from the master chambers, but close to the library. The rooms were surprisingly warm, decorated in shades of cream and dusty pink that seemed almost out of place in such a fortress. "These were my mother's rooms," Theron said from the doorway. "She redecorated them herself. I thought you might find them more comfortable than the alternatives." His mother's rooms. Sonara looked around with new eyes, seeing not just the colors, but the careful choices. The books on the nightstand, the writing desk positioned to catch morning light, the small watercolor paintings of Mediterranean coastlines, so different from the wild moors outside. She was homesick, Sonara said softly, for somewhere warmer. Theron didn't respond immediately. "She was from Italy originally. My father met her during a grand tour. She never quite adjusted to English winters." He cleared his throat. "Dinner is at 7. Mrs. Caddick will send someone to help you dress. Tomorrow we'll begin preparations for the wedding." He turned to leave, then paused. "There's something else you should know. Something I should have mentioned earlier, but..." He stopped, uncharacteristically hesitant. "My sister lives here. Britta. She's 17. She doesn't leave the house." "Why not?" "Because the world was cruel to her once, and I've spent 7 years making sure it never has the opportunity again." His voice carried an edge that made Sonara's chest tighten. "She may be wary of you initially. She's not accustomed to strangers. But she's kind beneath the caution, and she's the reason I need my reputation restored." "The reason?" "She deserves a future beyond these walls. Someday, when she's ready, I want doors to be open to her. Not slammed shut because her brother is a pariah." His gray eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw the exhaustion beneath the steel. "That's why I need respectability. Not for myself. For her." He left before she could respond, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Sonara sank onto the bed, her mind reeling with everything she'd learned. A mother who died missing sunlight, a sister who couldn't face the world, and a duke who had built a fortress of fear around everything he loved. She had agreed to marry a man far more complicated than society's whispers suggested. And somewhere beneath the shock and uncertainty, Sonara felt the first fragile stirrings of something dangerous. Understanding. The wedding took place 3 days later in Dunmarren's private chapel, witnessed by Merrick, Mrs. Caddick, and a local vicar who seemed terrified of the groom. Sonara wore a gown of ivory silk that had belonged to Theron's mother, hastily altered to fit her smaller frame. The dress was exquisite, far finer than anything she'd owned, and wearing it felt like stepping into someone else's story. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike. They spoke their vows with careful neutrality, 2 strangers binding themselves together for practical purposes. When Theron slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band that had also been his mother's, his hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. "You may kiss the bride," the vicar intoned. Theron leaned forward, and Sonara's breath caught. But he merely pressed his lips to her forehead, a chaste acknowledgement that conveyed nothing of passion and everything of respect. "It's done," he murmured against her skin. "You're safe now. Legally, permanently safe." That night, he escorted her to her chambers and bid her good night at the door. There was no suggestion of consummation, no expectation of intimacy. He simply told her to rest well and disappeared down the corridor toward his own rooms. Sonara lay awake for hours, her new ring catching moonlight, wondering what she had become. The Duchess of Thornwood. 2 weeks passed in strange domesticity. Sonara explored Dunmarin's endless corridors, discovering libraries and music rooms and a conservatory filled with plants that should not have survived this climate. She met the cats, all 7 of them, and learned their names from a footman who seemed delighted that someone finally asked. She met Britta on her 5th day, almost by accident. The girl was hiding in the conservatory, tucked behind a massive fern, a book clutched to her chest like armor. She was small and pale, with Theron's dark hair but eyes of deep brown, and a scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw, puckered and white. "I'm sorry," Sonara said quickly, backing toward the door. "I didn't mean to intrude." "Wait," Britta's voice was barely above a whisper. "You're her, the one who hid in his carriage." "I am." That was brave. The girl's expression was difficult to read. Or stupid. I can't decide which. Perhaps both. Sonara offered a small smile. "I'm Sonara. I know who you are. Theron talks about you." Britta's eyes narrowed. "He says you argue with him. Nobody argues with him." "Someone should. He's not always right." A ghost of a smile crossed Britta's face. "No, he's not." After that, Britta began appearing at meals, silent but present. She watched Sonara with cautious curiosity, and Sonara was careful not to push, not to ask about the scar or why she hid from the world. Trust was earned, Theron had said. She intended to earn it. The first real test came 3 weeks into the marriage. A letter arrived from London, elegantly penned on expensive paper. Lady Fenwick, a prominent society hostess, and one of the few who had ever received Theron socially, was hosting her annual winter soiree. The Duke and his new Duchess were expressly invited. "She's testing the waters," Theron explained over breakfast. "If we're received at Lady Fenwick's, other doors will begin to open. If we're rejected, the gossip will become significantly worse." "And Lord Harwick?" "We'll certainly be watching. He's been making inquiries, according to my sources. He knows you're here, but he hasn't decided whether to challenge me directly." Theron's expression hardened. "This event will force his hand. If we present a united front, if society accepts you as my Duchess, his claims on you become impossible to pursue. If we fail, he'll find a way to take me back. Over my dead body." The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. Theron looked away, composing himself. "The point is, we need to succeed, which means we need to be convincing. You need society to believe you actually want me. I need society to believe we're devoted to each other." His eyes met hers again, something complicated swimming in their depths. "Can you do that? Pretend to love a man they call a monster?" Sonara thought of the past 3 weeks, the quiet dinners where they discussed everything from philosophy to politics, the way he always asked her opinion and actually listened to her answers. The night she'd found Britta crying in the hallway and had gone to Theron for help, and he'd spent 2 hours sitting with his sister, reading aloud until she calmed. "I don't think it will require much pretending," she said quietly. Something flickered across his face. Hope, perhaps, or fear. "We leave in 4 days. Mrs. Caddick will arrange appropriate gowns." He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "I suggest you rest. The next week will be exhausting." He was halfway to the door when Sonara spoke again. "Theron." He stopped, but didn't turn. "What happens if they ask how we fell in love? Tell them the truth." His voice was rough. "Tell them you climbed into my carriage, and I was lost from that moment." He left before she could ask what he meant, but her heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Lady Fenwick's soiree was everything Sonara had dreaded, and nothing she expected. The London townhouse blazed with light, crowded with society's most powerful and most vicious. Sonara wore emerald silk, a gown Theron had commissioned specifically for this occasion, and enough diamonds to ransom a small kingdom. His mother's jewelry, he'd said, pressing the case into her hands with something approaching tenderness. They entered together, his hand firm on the small of her back, and the room fell silent. Every eye turned toward them. Every conversation ceased. Sonara felt the weight of their scrutiny like a physical thing, pressing against her chest. Then Theron leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "Smile like you pity them for their small lives." She laughed, surprised and genuine, and the sound seemed to break the spell. Conversation resumed, though she could feel attention still fixed on them, watching, waiting. "Your Grace." Lady Fenwick approached, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes and an expression of calculated warmth. "How delightful that you could attend, and this must be your bride. We've heard such intriguing stories." "All true, I assure you," Theron said smoothly. "Lady Thornwood is every bit as remarkable as rumor suggests." Lady Fenwick's gaze swept over Sonara, assessing. "You're Lord Harwick's former ward." "I am." Sonara kept her voice steady. "His hospitality was memorable. I was quite desperate to leave it behind." Something glinted in Lady Fenwick's eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or approval. "Indeed. Well, you've certainly traded up." She gestured toward the crowded room. "I believe you have many admirers curious to make your acquaintance, Your Grace. Do try not to terrify them too badly." As she swept away, Theron exhaled. "That went better than expected. The night is young." They circulated through the gathering, Theron introducing her to a blur of lords and ladies, whose names Sonara tried desperately to remember. Most were politely curious. Some were openly hostile. All of them were watching for cracks in the facade. Then she saw him. Lord Harwick stood near the refreshment table, a glass of wine in his hand, and a smile like a blade on his face. Beside him, his watery eyes fixed on Sonara with unmistakable hunger, was Sir Godric Vane. "Theron," she whispered, "I see them." His arm tightened around her waist. "Stay close to me." Harwick approached with the casual confidence of a man who believed he still held all the cards. Vane followed like a shadow, that terrible smile never wavering. "Your Grace." Harwick's bull was precisely correct and somehow insulting. "How unexpected to see you in society, and with my dear ward, no less." "Former ward," Theron corrected. "Lady Sonara is the Duchess of Thornwood now. Whatever claim you imagine you had on her ended with our marriage." "Did it?" Harwick's smile widened. "I wonder. The circumstances of that marriage seem rather irregular. A special license, obtained in haste, for a bride who fled her guardian's protection in the middle of the night." His eyes glittered. "Some might call that abduction." The room had gone quiet around them. Sonara could feel dozens of ears straining to catch every word. "Some might call it rescue," she said clearly, her voice carrying further than she'd intended. "From a guardian who attempted to sell me to a man who has buried 2 wives under suspicious circumstances." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vane's smile finally cracked, revealing something ugly beneath. "Careful, girl," he hissed. You're making accusations you cannot prove. I'm making observations that anyone with eyes can verify. Sonara stepped forward, shaking with fury and fear in equal measure. Your first wife fell down a staircase. Your second drowned in a pond she had no reason to enter. And you expected me to become your third. Sonara. Theron's voice was quiet but commanding. That's enough. She turned to him, expecting censure. Instead, she found him looking at her with something approaching wonder. She said what needed saying, he continued, addressing the room at large. Lord Harwick's guardianship of my wife was characterized by manipulation and cruelty. Sir Godric Vane is a man whose previous wives died under circumstances that warrant investigation rather than a third marriage. I removed Lady Sonara from their influence, and I married her because she deserved protection and chose to accept mine. His arm slid around her waist, pulling her close. Anyone who challenges the legitimacy of our union challenges me directly. I trust I don't need to explain what that means. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Then Lady Fenwick began to clap. Slowly, uncertainly, others joined her. Not everyone, Sonara noted. Some faces remained hostile, suspicious, but enough. Enough to shift the tide. Harwick's expression had curdled into something poisonous. This isn't over, Thornwood. Yes, Theron said pleasantly. It is. He turned Sonara away from them and guided her toward the opposite side of the room. She was trembling, she realized, shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline and terror. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, Theron murmured. Perhaps both. He laughed, low and warm, and the sound loosened something in her chest. Perhaps both, he agreed. But God help me, Sonara. I've never seen anything more magnificent. She looked up at him, at this man who had called her magnificent, who was looking at her as if she'd hung the moon, and felt the last of her carefully maintained walls begin to crumble. This was supposed to be an arrangement, a business transaction, a temporary alliance of convenience. But the way her heart was pounding as he gazed down at her suggested it had become something else entirely. The weeks following Lady Fenwick's soiree passed in a haze of unexpected contentment. Society had not entirely embraced the Duke and Duchess of Thornwood, but the tide had turned enough to matter. Invitations arrived with increasing frequency. Ladies who had previously crossed the street to avoid Theron now nodded politely when they passed. And Lord Harwick, though still lurking at the edges of social gatherings, had made no further public moves against them. He's regrouping, Theron said one evening as they sat in the library, a fire crackling in the massive hearth. Don't mistake silence for surrender. I'm not. Sonara turned a page in her book without reading it. I'm simply enjoying the reprieve. She had come to treasure these evenings. The library had become their sanctuary, a place where titles and expectations fell away, and they were simply two people who enjoyed each other's company. They read in companionable silence, debated philosophy and politics with increasing heat, and sometimes just talked, wandering through conversations that touched on everything and nothing. Tonight, Theron had abandoned his book entirely. He sat watching the fire, his profile sharp against the dancing flames, lost in thoughts he wasn't sharing. What are you thinking about? Sonara asked. My father. He didn't look at her. He died in this room. Heart failure, they said. I was 22. I'm sorry. Don't be. He was a difficult man, cold, demanding. He believed emotion was weakness, and affection was manipulation. Theron's jaw tightened. He raised me to be exactly like him. Took me years to unlearn the damage. Sonara set down her book. Is that why you built walls around yourself? Learned behavior? Partly. The rest was necessity. He finally turned to look at her, and the vulnerability in his expression made her chest ache. After what happened to Britta, I couldn't afford to be seen as soft. Couldn't give anyone ammunition to use against us. What did happen to Britta? The question hung between them. Sanara had been careful not to ask, waiting for him to share when he was ready. But somehow, tonight felt different. The firelight, the intimacy, the weeks of slowly building trust. Theron was quiet, and neither spoke for several heartbeats. When he finally answered, his voice was rough with old pain. She was 10 years old. I was 25. He paused, gathering himself. There was a house party. I left Britta in the care of a governess I trusted. A man, a guest. He cornered her in the garden. She fought back. He had a knife. He stopped. Couldn't finish. You don't have to, Sanara said quickly. I do. You should know. He drew a ragged breath. When I found them, she was bleeding, and he was standing over her. I nearly killed him with my bare hands. Would have, if the other guests hadn't pulled me off. The duel came later, after he had the audacity to threaten legal action for assault, after he suggested that Britta had invited his attention. Theron's hands had clenched into fists. I challenged him publicly. He accepted because refusing would have confirmed his guilt, and I shot him through the heart at 20 paces. Everything clicked into place. The gossip she'd overheard at Harwick's ball, the whispers about a man killed in cold blood. None of it had contained this truth. The story society tells is different, she said carefully. I let them believe what they wanted. The real story would have exposed Britta to scrutiny, to questions, to judgment she didn't deserve. His voice hardened. Better the world thinks me a murderer than knows what was done to my sister. Sanara rose from her chair and crossed to where he sat. She knelt beside him, taking one clenched fist in both her hands. You protected her. I failed her first. If I had been there, you couldn't have known. You trusted someone you shouldn't have. That's not the same as failing her. He looked down at their joined hands, something cracking behind his eyes. She hasn't left Dunmerran since. She was too afraid at first. And then afraid became familiar. She built a world she could control, and I built walls around it to keep everyone else out. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Sometimes I wonder if I've made things worse, if my protection has become its own kind of prison. Have you asked her? What? Have you asked Britta what she wants? Not what you think she needs, but what she actually desires for her own life? Theron stared at her, as if she'd said something revolutionary. She's still healing. She's been healing for 7 years. That doesn't mean she's not also living, or wanting to live. Sanara squeezed his hand. You gave her safety when she needed it, but maybe now she needs something else. Permission to grow. Room to become whoever she's meant to be. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Theron's thumb brushed across her knuckles, the touch almost unconscious. How do you do that? He asked quietly. He do what? See so clearly, through all the noise and complication, straight to the heart of things. His eyes met hers, and the intensity there stole her breath. You've been here less than 2 months, and you understand my family better than I do. I understand what it's like to feel trapped by someone else's idea of protection. Sanara's voice caught. Lord Harwick called himself my guardian for 5 years. Every choice he made, he framed as being for my own good. I know what it feels like to have your life constrained by someone else's fear. Is that how you feel here? Constrained? No. The word came instantly, without thought. Here I feel seen. For the first time in years, someone is asking what I want, rather than telling me what I need. Something shifted in Theron's expression. Something warm and dangerous, and full of possibility. He lifted his free hand to her face, his palm warm against her cheek. Sinara. Her name had never sounded like that before, like a prayer, like a promise. "What do you want?" he asked. "Right now, in this moment. What do you actually want?" She should have said something sensible, something about their arrangement, their agreement, the careful boundaries they had established. But his hand was on her face, and his eyes were burning into hers, and she was so tired of being sensible. "You," she whispered. "I want you." He kissed her. Not like the chaste brush of lips at their wedding. This was heat and hunger, and months of tension finally igniting. His fingers slid into her hair, tilting her head back as he deepened the kiss. She clutched at his shoulders, pulling herself closer, desperate for more contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Theron pressed his forehead against hers. "This changes things," he said roughly. "I know. I can't go back to pretending you're just a convenient arrangement. I can't." He made a sound that was almost pain. "If we do this, it's real. Completely real. No escape clauses. No annulment after a year. You would be my wife in truth." "I know," she said again. "And you still want this?" Sinara pulled back to look at him properly. This man who had rescued her from darkness, who had trusted her with his deepest wounds, who had looked at her from the very first night as if she was something precious. "I want this," she said. "I want you. Not because I need protection or security, but because somewhere in the last 2 months, I fell in love with you." The words hung between them, enormous and irreversible. Theron's expression transformed, wonder and disbelief, and something that looked terrifyingly like joy. "Say it again." "I love you, Theron Blackwood. Heaven help me. I love you." He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent, and when he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "I love you too. I think I have since you climbed into my carriage and demanded to know what your rescue would cost you." He laughed, slightly unsteady. "I was lost from that moment. I just didn't have the courage to admit it." Sinara smiled, her heart fuller than she had ever imagined possible. "What happens now?" "Now?" He stood, pulling her up with him, his hands warm and steady on her waist. "Now we stop pretending this marriage is temporary. Now we build something real." He kissed her once more, and Sinara felt the last of her walls crumble entirely. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Morning brought clarity, and with it, doubt. Sinara woke alone in her chambers, the events of the previous night playing through her mind in vivid detail. The kiss, the confession, the way Theron had looked at her as if she'd given him something precious. They had parted at her door, both agreeing that consummating their relationship deserved more consideration than a passionate decision made by firelight. Theron had been a gentleman, as always, though the hunger in his eyes when he said goodnight had made her knees weak. But now, in the harsh light of morning, questions she had ignored began demanding answers. What if she was confusing gratitude for love? Theron had saved her from a terrible fate. Of course she felt strongly about him, but was that emotion love, or simply relief dressed in romantic clothing? And what of his feelings? He had spent years in isolation. She was the first woman to breach his defenses. Perhaps he was as confused as she feared she might be. A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Come in." But it wasn't her maid who entered. It was Britta. The girl slipped inside and closed the door behind her, her expression more animated than Sinara had ever seen. "He told me," Britta said without preamble, "about last night. He's absolutely besotted. I haven't seen him smile like that in years." "Britta, don't ruin it." Britta crossed to sit on the edge of the bed, her scarred face earnest. "I know you're probably convincing yourself it isn't real, That's what people do when something good happens. They look for reasons to reject it. You don't know that's what I'm doing. I know that look. I've worn it myself. Britta's voice softened. After what happened to me, I spent years waiting for the other shoe to drop. Every moment of peace felt like the calm before another storm. I convinced myself that trusting anyone, wanting anything, would only lead to more pain. What changed? Theron. He never stopped showing up, never stopped being present and patient and unfailingly kind, even when I pushed him away. Britta reached out to take Sonara's hand. He's not perfect. He's stubborn and overprotective, and sometimes infuriatingly certain he knows best. But he loves completely, without reservation. If he says he loves you, he means it with everything he has. Sonara felt tears prickling behind her eyes. I'm scared, she admitted, of wanting something this much, of trusting that it won't be taken away. Of course you're scared. You'd be a fool not to be, given everything you've survived. Britta squeezed her hand. But you can't let fear make your decisions. That's how you end up trapped forever. The words landed with unexpected weight. Britta, who had spent 7 years hiding from the world, telling her not to let fear win. When did you become so wise? I've had a lot of time to think. A small smile crossed Britta's face. And someone recently suggested that maybe I've been letting someone else's fear constrain my life. That perhaps I need permission to grow. Sonara recognized her own words reflected back to her. Theron told you what I said. He tells me everything. We're all we've had for a long time. Britta stood, straightening her dress with quiet dignity. Don't hurt him, Sonara. He spent years building armor around his heart. You're the first person he's let inside. If you don't truly want this, tell him now. Don't let him hope for something you can't give. She left without another word. Sonara sat alone with the weight of everything that had been said. Britta was right. She was looking for reasons to doubt, because doubt felt safer than hope. Safer than vulnerability. Safer than admitting that she wanted Theron Blackwood with a ferocity that terrified her. But safety was just another word for prison. She dressed quickly and went to find her husband. Theron was in his study, surrounded by correspondence and account books. He looked up when she entered, and the hope that blazed in his eyes nearly undid her. Sonara, we need to talk. His expression flickered. That phrase rarely precedes good news. It precedes honest news. She closed the door behind her and crossed to stand before his desk. Last night, I said I loved you. I meant it. But I need to know if you meant what you said as well. You doubt me? I doubt myself. I doubt whether what I feel is love or gratitude. I doubt whether you can truly want me or whether I'm simply convenient. I doubt. She broke off, frustration tightening her throat. I have spent so long being used as a pawn in other people's games. I need to know this is real. Theron rose slowly, circling the desk to stand before her. You want proof? I want truth. Then here is the truth. He took her hands in his grip warm and sure. I spent 3 years on the continent, running from what I'd done and what I'd failed to prevent. I told myself I was protecting my family's reputation, but really I was hiding from my own shame. When I returned, I expected to spend the rest of my life alone. I had made peace with it. He lifted one hand to her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. And then you climbed into my carriage, covered in mud, shaking with terror. And when I offered you help, instead of weeping with gratitude, you demanded to know the price. His voice roughened. In that moment, I saw someone who had been beaten down by life, but refused to break. Someone who met adversity with practicality instead of despair. Someone extraordinary. Theron, I didn't fall in love with you because you were convenient. I fell in love with you because you're magnificent, because you challenged me and confronted my enemies and saw through my walls to the man underneath. He pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, Senara. Not as a duty or an arrangement. I love you because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. She kissed him, fierce and desperate, and full of all the feelings she had been afraid to embrace. When they broke apart, both trembling, she whispered against his lips. No more doubt. No more fear. This is real. This is real, he agreed. They stood there, wrapped in each other, and for one perfect moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The moment shattered 3 days later. Senara was taking tea with Britta in the conservatory when Merrick appeared in the doorway, his normally composed expression tight with alarm. Your Grace, there's a situation. What kind of situation? Lord Harwick has arrived, with Sir Godric Vane and a magistrate. Merrick's voice dropped. They're claiming the Duke abducted you. They have papers demanding your return to Lord Harwick's custody, pending an investigation. The blood drained from Senara's face. That's impossible. We're married. Harwick has no claim. The papers suggest the marriage was performed under duress, that His Grace coerced you into fleeing your guardian's protection and forced you into wedlock against your will. Merrick hesitated. They're also claiming the special license was obtained fraudulently, and they have documents showing your guardianship extends until your 25th birthday. Senara's mind reeled. 25th birthday? She had never seen any such document. Harwick had told her the guardianship ended at her majority. That can't be right, she said, her voice unsteady. I was never told. Which is precisely what Harwick intended, Merrick said grimly. He's claiming the Duke knew and proceeded anyway. Britta grabbed Senara's hand, her face pale. They can't do this. They can't just— Where is Theron? Senara interrupted. In the main hall. He sent me to warn you before things escalate further. Senara rose, her mind racing. This was Harwick's countermove. He'd been planning it since the soiree, gathering evidence, recruiting allies, finding a magistrate willing to challenge a duke. Stay here, she told Britta. Lock the door, and don't open it for anyone but Theron or me. Senara, please, Britta. I need to know you're safe. She didn't wait for a response before hurrying toward the main hall. The scene that greeted her was worse than she'd imagined. Harwick stood in the center of the grand entrance, flanked by Vane and a nervous-looking man in official robes who must be the magistrate. Behind them, half a dozen armed men waited with hands on their weapons, and facing them, utterly alone, was Theron. Ah, there she is. Harwick's smile was pure poison. My dear ward, looking well. I trust the Duke hasn't mistreated you too badly. I'm not your ward. Senara moved to stand beside Theron, drawing strength from his presence. I'm the Duchess of Thornwood, married legally and willingly. So you've been coached to say. But witnesses at Lady Fenwick's gathering observed clear signs of coercion. Harwick turned to the magistrate. You see how she trembles, how she positions herself near him for protection. Classic signs of an abuse victim. I'm trembling with rage, not fear. Senara's voice cut like glass. And I stand beside my husband because I choose to, not because I'm afraid of him. The lady seems quite clear in her position, the magistrate observed, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The lady has been manipulated by a known killer. Vane stepped forward, his watery eyes fixed on Senara with undisguised hunger. The Duke's reputation speaks for itself. He murdered a man in cold blood, fled the country like a coward, and has been shunned by decent society ever since. I killed a man who was assaulting an innocent, Theron said calmly. I would do it again. And I would do considerably worse to any man who threatened my family. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Harwick's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. Threats won't help you, Thornwood. The law's quite clear. A ward cannot be married without her guardian's consent. That consent was never given. He produced a sheaf of papers with theatrical flourish. I have documentation proving Lady Sonara was my legal ward until her 25th birthday. She won't reach that age for another 2 years. Any marriage contracted before then, without my approval, is void. Sonara stared at the papers in his hand. She had never seen this document, never known such a clause existed. Harwick had hidden it from her deliberately, waiting for exactly this moment. I see you're surprised. Harwick's voice dripped with satisfaction. Your dear father was quite specific in his will. He trusted me to guide you until you were mature enough to make your own decisions. The marriage is invalid. The Duchess of Thornwood doesn't exist. You're still my ward, Sonara, and you're coming home. No. Theron's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The marriage stands. Whatever legal technicality you're attempting to exploit, it won't work. Technicality, Harwick laughed. It's not a technicality, it's the law. Your precious marriage certificate isn't worth the paper it's printed on. Then we'll obtain your consent. Theron's expression was deadly calm. Name your price, Harwick. Whatever you want. Money, land, political favors. Name it, and it's yours. I'll pay anything to keep my wife. The room went still. Sonara stared at her husband, stunned by the desperation beneath his composure. He was offering to be extorted, to give Harwick whatever he demanded. For her, Harwick's eyes gleamed with greed. Anything? Within reason. Name your terms. Consideration flickered across Harwick's face. The opportunity to extract wealth from a duke was clearly tempting. But then Vane leaned close, whispering something in his ear, and Harwick's expression hardened. I'm afraid there's only one thing I want, Thornwood, and that's her. He gestured to Sonara. Sir Godric has been most patient, waiting for his bride. I won't disappoint him again. You cannot force her to marry against her will. I don't need to force her. I simply need to remove her from your influence, long enough to remind her where her loyalties should lie. Harwick's smile turned cruel. She's quite compliant when properly motivated. A few weeks in isolation, restricted food, limited sleep. You'd be amazed how quickly resistance crumbles. Red rage flooded Theron's face. If you touch her, you'll what? Kill me like you killed that other man? Harwick spread his hands. In front of a magistrate and witnesses? Even you aren't that reckless. The armed men shifted, hands tightening on weapons. The magistrate looked terrified, but resolute. Harwick had planned this carefully. There was no way out that didn't end in bloodshed. And if Theron fought, if he killed again to protect her, he would hang. Not even a duke could murder a lord in front of a magistrate and escape consequences. Stop! Sonara stepped forward, putting herself between Theron and Harwick. I'll go with you. Sonara, no! Listen to me. She turned to face Theron, her heart breaking at the anguish in his eyes. If you fight, you die. If you die, Britta loses the only protection she has. I won't let that happen. I won't let you sacrifice yourself. It's not your choice. She touched his face, memorizing every line, every angle. You saved me once. Let me save you now. There has to be another way. There isn't. Not today. She rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his lips, pouring everything she felt into that single moment of contact. Find another way. Use your resources, your connections. Find a legal solution. I'll survive whatever Harwick does until then. I can't. You can. You must. She pulled back, steeling herself against the tears threatening to fall. I love you, Theron. That's not going to change, no matter what happens. Find me. Promise me you'll find me." "I promise." His voice cracked. "I swear, on everything I am, I will bring you home." Sanara nodded, then turned to face Harwick. "I'll come willingly. But if you hurt him, if you touch Britta, if you do anything to this household—" "You'll what?" "I'll kill myself before I marry Vane." She said it calmly, with absolute conviction. "You'll get nothing. No payment for your debts, no land, no victory. Think carefully before you push me, Lord Harwick. You know I mean it." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Harwick's face. "Fine. The Duke and his sister remain untouched. But you come now, without further argument." Sanara didn't look back as she walked toward the door. If she looked back, if she saw Theron's face, she would break. But his voice followed her anyway, raw with desperation and love. "I will find you. Whatever it takes, however long it takes. I will bring you home." The door closed behind her, and Sanara was alone with her enemies. Theron found her 6 days later. 6 days of Harwick's hospitality, which meant a locked room, minimal food, and visits from Sir Godric Vane that she endured with silent fury. 6 days of holding on to hope when hope seemed impossible. 6 days of trusting that her husband would keep his promise. The rescue came at midnight. Sanara was jolted awake by the sound of splintering wood and men shouting. She stumbled to the door of her prison just as it burst inward, revealing Theron covered in blood, his eyes wild. "Sanara!" She threw herself into his arms. "You're hurt. Not my blood." Harwick's guards weren't particularly welcoming. He pulled back to examine her face, his hands gentle despite the violence of his arrival. "Did they hurt you? Did Vane?" "I'm all right. Tired and hungry, but unharmed." She clutched his shirt, unwilling to let go. "How?" Harwick had legal authority. Had. A fierce smile crossed Theron's face. "The guardianship document was a forgery. Your father never extended Harwick's authority past your majority. Harwick manufactured the papers years ago, anticipating this exact situation." "A forgery? How did you prove it?" "I hired the best document experts in England, paid them triple their usual rate to work around the clock. The original documents are still on file with the court that processed your father's will." Theron's arms tightened around her. Harwick overplayed his hand. His entire case collapsed the moment the magistrate saw the evidence. And Harwick himself? Fled the moment he realized his scheme had failed. Vane as well. But it doesn't matter. Warrants have been issued. They won't escape justice this time. Relief flooded through her, so intense she swayed on her feet. "It's over. It's over." Theron cupped her face in his hands, his eyes bright with emotion. "Come home, Sanara. Come home and never leave again." They remarried 3 weeks later. Not because they needed to. The original marriage had been valid all along. But because Sanara wanted to. She wanted to stand before witnesses and speak vows without fear or manipulation shadowing the moment. She wanted to choose Theron publicly, irrevocably, completely. The ceremony took place at Dunmarin's chapel, the same space where they'd first exchanged rings. But this time, the pews were filled with people who mattered. Lady Fenwick had traveled from London. Several parliamentary allies of Theron's had made the journey. Even Britta attended, sitting in the front row, with tears streaming down her scarred face. Sanara wore white silk, a gown Theron had commissioned from the finest modiste in England. Around her throat hung a necklace of sapphires and diamonds that had belonged to his mother, given to her that morning with trembling hands. "She would have loved you," he'd said. "She would have been so grateful to see me happy." The vows they spoke were traditional, but the words carried new weight. When Theron slid the ring onto her finger, a new ring this time, designed specifically for her. His voice shook with emotion. With this ring, I thee wed. With my body, I thee worship. With all my worldly goods, I thee endow. Senara smiled through her tears. With all my heart, I receive you. They kissed, and the chapel erupted in applause. That night, they finally consummated their marriage. Theron was gentle and patient, attuned to her every response, treating her body like something precious. And Senara discovered that physical intimacy with someone she truly loved was nothing like the clinical duty she'd been taught to expect. Afterward, lying tangled together in the enormous bed, Theron pressed a kiss to her hair. I have something for you. Another gift. You've already been far too generous. This one is different. He reached for something on the nightstand, then pressed a folded document into her hands. Open it. Senara unfolded the paper, reading by candlelight. It was a deed. Her mother's estate in Wiltshire, the property Harwick had coveted, transferred into Senara's name alone. Not as Theron's property, not as the Duchess of Thornwood's holding, but as hers. Harwick's claims have been nullified, Theron explained quietly. The estate reverts to its rightful owner. You. Regardless of our marriage, regardless of what happens between us, that land belongs to you. Your security. Your legacy. Theron. Her voice broke. This is everything. No. He pulled her close, his arms warm and sure around her. You're everything. The rest is just details. She kissed him, tasting salt from her own tears. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you too. He smiled, and she saw her entire future reflected in his eyes. For the rest of our lives, Senara. For the rest of our lives, and whatever comes after. 5 years later, the drawing room of Dunmarron Hall echoed with chaos. Senara sat in her favorite chair, watching her husband attempt to wrangle their 4-year-old son, Marcus, while simultaneously entertaining their 2-year-old daughter, Isabeau. Both children had inherited their father's dark hair and their mother's stubborn determination, a combination that made every day an adventure. Papa, I want to ride the horse. You're too young for horses, Marcus. Aunt Britta said I could. Theron shot a glare toward the doorway, where Britta was trying unsuccessfully to hide her laughter. Senara smiled at the scene. So much had changed in 5 years. Britta had finally emerged from her self-imposed exile, encouraged by Senara's gentle persistence and her own growing courage. She had even traveled to London last season, attending carefully selected social events, rebuilding a life she'd thought lost forever. The scar on her face drew stares sometimes, but Britta no longer hid from them. Battle wounds, she told anyone who asked. I survived something terrible. I'm not ashamed of the proof. Lord Harwick had been captured attempting to flee to France, tried for fraud and conspiracy, and sentenced to transportation. Sir Godric Vane had met a more fitting end, desperate for funds after the scandal at Lady Fenwick's soiree. He had rushed into marriage with a wealthy widow who proved considerably more resourceful than his previous victims. She discovered evidence of his crimes and ensured it reached the proper authorities. He died in prison awaiting trial, unmourned. Justice, Senara had learned, sometimes took time. But it came eventually. Mama! Isabeau toddled toward her, arms outstretched. Senara scooped her daughter up, pressing kisses to her chubby cheeks. Hello, my darling. Are you tormenting your father? Papa's silly. Papa is very silly, Senara agreed, meeting Theron's eyes over their daughter's head. He grinned at her, and even after 5 years of marriage, that smile still made her heart skip. Later, after the children had been surrendered to their nurses and the house had quieted, Theron found Senara in the library. Their library now, filled with books they'd collected together, with memories of countless evenings spent reading and talking and falling deeper in love. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked, settling beside her on the settee. "About what?" "That night. The carriage. What might have happened if you'd hidden in someone else's vehicle?" Sinara considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I think about how close I came to a very different life. To no life at all, perhaps." She turned to face him, reaching up to trace the familiar lines of his face. "And then I think about how extraordinarily lucky we were. Two broken people, running from different kinds of darkness, finding each other by pure chance. Not chance." Theron caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Fate. Destiny. Whatever you want to call the force that put you in my carriage that night. You don't believe in fate. I didn't. Before you." His eyes were soft with love. "Now, I believe in everything." Sinara leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you," she murmured against his lips. "I love you too." He pulled her closer, and she felt his smile. "Always, Sinara. Every moment we have and whatever comes after." Outside, the wild moors of Northumberland stretched toward the horizon, beautiful and fierce and untamable. Inside, a family that had been built from chaos and fear and desperate choices thrived in warmth and love. Their story had begun with a desperate escape, a woman hiding in a stranger's carriage, fleeing a fate worse than death. It had become a truth worth fighting for. And they lived, as the best stories promise, happily ever after. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story made you laugh, cry, or believe in love all over again, please show your support by liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing it with fellow lovers of romantic tales. It means the world to us and keeps our little storytelling corner alive and thriving. Stay tuned. Another emotional story is waiting for you at the end of this video. Click, listen, and let your heart be swept away once more. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being here.